He thought he was about to die in the crushing tunnels of Zephyria 9, but when he opened his eyes, he wasn't panicking. He was calmly fixing his own broken bones, and she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The tunnels of Zephyria 9 hummed with the low, metallic groan of machinery, the kind that made even the most hardened miners feel like they were inside the throat of some enormous mechanical beast. Sparks arced from a half-dismantled fusion drill, painting the walls with brief flashes of orange light, and somewhere deep within the labyrinth, a graviton stabilizer flickered and buzzed like a nervous insect. Kael limped along the graded walkway, one hand clamped to his side where a jagged piece of metal had kissed him with unexpected enthusiasm. The pain throbbed with a dull insistence, yet his voice rang out clear and absurdly cheerful, echoing off the metal walls. "Well," he muttered to no one in particular, "I always wanted to try extreme acupuncture. Didn't think it would be free." From her vantage atop a maintenance platform, Lyra watched him. She had arrived at Zephyria 9 only weeks ago, her blue skin practically luminescent under the fluorescent lights, her long ears flicking like radar antennas as she tried to process what she was seeing. Humans were loud, clumsy, emotional. They screamed at pain, they panicked, they flailed like newborns. And yet here was one, apparently impaled, grinning as if the universe had just played a mildly inconvenient joke on him. Her violet eyes widened. "Is he laughing?" she whispered to herself, and then promptly scolded herself for thinking such a thing while someone was clearly bleeding. Kael's boot caught on a stray cable, sending him into an awkward sprawl against the cold metal floor. He groaned dramatically, more for theatrical effect than anything else. "Ah, gravity, old friend," he said, as if speaking to some invisible companion, "you really shouldn't sneak up behind me like that. It's rude." He flexed his fingers and winced. The bones in his arm had shifted, but instead of panicking, he gave a small, rueful grin and muttered, "Well, I suppose that's the universe telling me I need more upper body strength. Or maybe just better footwear." Lyra's tail-like ears twitched, a sign of both confusion and interest. She had seen humans in distress before, but none had carried themselves like this. None had joked in the face of imminent doom. She floated down to a lower platform, hovering cautiously with a patchwork of medical instruments strapped to her belt. She wasn't sure if she was supposed to intervene or just observe. "Do you require assistance?" she asked, her voice carrying the polite, clipped tones of someone used to proper procedure. Kael turned his head, one eye squinting, the other half-lidded with an impish gleam. "Depends. Can you tie a tourniquet without hitting me in the face?" he asked, his smile faintly ridiculous given the circumstances. Lyra stiffened, offended and amused simultaneously, but she couldn't help the small chuckle that escaped her throat. She had seen composure, yes, but humor in extremis. That was alien to her experience. Kael wriggled awkwardly and extracted a small, twisted piece of metal from his side, grimacing at the sting but shaking his head. "Nothing like a little self-surgery to get the morning started," he muttered, wiping sweat and blood from his brow. "Do you think the colony medbots would be jealous if I told them I'm fixing myself?" Lyra's eyes narrowed, partly in shock, partly in growing admiration. Even as she scolded herself for enjoying his jokes, she found her attention drawn entirely to the calm precision with which he inspected his own injuries, his fingers testing, aligning, and bracing each bone as though he were performing a delicate engineering procedure rather than enduring severe trauma. The air shimmered with heat from the nearby drills, and the faint electric scent of ozone clung to everything, mingling with the sharp tang of metal. Lyra realized she had been holding her breath, utterly captivated by this human, who seemed to exist in some peculiar bubble of composure, humor, and astonishing nerve. He muttered another joke about needing to file a complaint with the cosmos for hazardous working conditions, and she blinked, startled to find herself smiling. For the first time, the alien girl felt that humans might possess a type of courage she had never fully understood, a quiet, stubborn, ridiculous and somehow admirable courage that refused to bow, even when the universe clearly wanted it to. And as Kael finally set his arm at an awkward but functional angle, shrugged and grinned at her, Lyra realized that what had begun as shock was turning into something far stranger. Fascination, respect, and the faint, thrilling promise of connection across the impossible gulf of species. She floated closer, unsure whether she should help, observe, or simply marvel, and whispered, I have never seen anyone like you. Kael's grin widened, one brow arched. Lucky you then, he said. Most people just scream, but hay makes the stories better, right? And with that, the first thread of something unusual and unpredictable began to weave itself between them, as sparks from the nearby machinery danced like miniature stars across the scarred walls of Zephyria 9. Kael shifted carefully, testing the weight on his legs as the metallic floor hummed beneath him. His arm hung at an awkward angle, but he had already aligned the bones as best he could. Well, he said, wincing slightly, if anyone asks, tell them I invented a new yoga pose. The impaled engineer. Very exclusive. Lyra floated closer, her long ears twitching with every movement, her blue skin catching the dim light from the flickering overhead panels. She carried a toolkit of alien instruments, polished and efficient, yet utterly useless if Kael had his way. Your technique, she stammered, peering at his arm, it's unconventional, dangerous even. Why not call a medbot? Kael grinned, one hand bracing against a railing. Medbots, he said. I tried once. They sulked at me for interrupting their tea time, then insisted on sterilization protocols that took 3 hours and involved a lecture on gravity compliance. No offense, Lyra, but I like to think of myself as a faster, funnier alternative. He gestured at the twisted metal beam, now precariously leaning against the wall. Besides, I prefer my surgeries with a bit of style, an occasional sarcasm. Lyra's ears flicked sharply. She was bemused, irritated, and strangely charmed all at once. She knelt carefully beside him, trying to hold the arm steady. You mustn't joke while bones are misaligned, she said, her voice firm but betraying a hint of amusement. It's painful, Kael interrupted with a wink. Yes, I know. I've had worse. Once, a gravimetric field collapsed on my foot. I think the universe was trying to teach me humility, or maybe it just enjoys a good laugh. He tested the limb experimentally and hissed. Okay, humility lesson 1. Ouch. Lyra blinked. He wasn't screaming, he wasn't fainting, and yet he reacted with precise awareness to every pang of pain. She adjusted her grip on the alien splints she had prepared, marveling at how methodical he was. With a small, frustrated sigh, she muttered, Humans are remarkably reckless. Kael tilted his head, smiling faintly. We call it ingenuity under pressure. Makes for better stories later, trust me. Now, help me straighten this leg without turning me into a pretzel, would you? The two worked together, Kael issuing sarcastic commentary while Lyra struggled to keep a straight face. Careful, he warned as she nudged the splint into place, or I'll report you to intergalactic etiquette authorities for excessive seriousness. Lyra's ears twitched, almost like a blush, and she stifled a laugh. Perhaps your species enjoys pain too much, she said, trying to sound stern, to joke at such a moment. Kael chuckled softly, wincing as he flexed his fingers. Not pain, just perspective. And maybe a little masochism, he said, grinning. Pain is temporary, stories are forever. The air in the tunnel shimmered faintly, with the hum of energy fields from the nearby graviton stabilizer. Sparks from the damaged drill still drifted lazily through the air, and the metallic scent of ozone mixed with the tang of blood. Kael leaned on Lyra's careful hands while she secured a brace around his arm. This feels oddly intimate, he quipped. Don't worry, I'm usually less needy with strangers. Lyra's ears twitched sharply, a reaction Kael promptly called intergalactic communication signals. She glared at him, but the faint upward curl of her lips betrayed her amusement. Minutes passed, marked by Kael's ongoing jokes and Lyra's careful adjustments. He flexed a finger, then his toes, making occasional humorous complaints. "I demand applause for my resilience," he said with mock authority, "or at least a holographic medal." Lyra, unable to resist, gave a small laugh, the sound echoing softly against the metal walls. Finally, Kael straightened, leaning on the railing for support. He flexed his now-aligned arm and leg experimentally, grimacing slightly but with unmistakable satisfaction. "Not bad, eh? I'll probably live to bicker another day," he said, giving Lyra a crooked smile. She studied him for a moment, fascination mixed with disbelief. The calm, methodical precision, the humor in the face of serious injury, the sheer stubbornness. It was unlike anything she had seen. Lyra shook her head lightly, trying to process her own reactions. I, I cannot decide if you are reckless, brave, or insane," she admitted, the corners of her mouth lifting in a rare, shy smile. Kael's grin widened, and he extended a hand, theatrically wounded yet dignified. "Pick whichever works. It's all part of the charm," he said, and somehow, in the midst of broken bones, metal sparks, and flickering lights, Lyra found herself laughing fully for the first time since arriving on Zephyria 9. Humor and resilience intertwined, and the alien girl realized that this human was unlike any being she had known. A strange combination of audacity, calm, and wit that was quietly magnetic. As they prepared to move toward the colony's main medical bay, she found herself leaning just a little closer, ears flicking in curiosity, unable to tear her eyes from the human who joked even as he aligned his own bones. Kael's arm throbbed in steady, insistent pulses, but he held it at just the right angle to avoid the sharpest pain. He flexed his fingers experimentally and grimaced, not from panic, but from the familiar, dull ache that had become almost a friend during his misadventures. "Ah, yes," he muttered, leaning against the railing with a theatrical groan, "my very own internal drum solo. Never wanted a concert, but hey, free entertainment." Lyra floated nearby, her long, delicate ears twitching in both alarm and fascination. She had followed him through the twisting corridors of the mining tunnels, watching the strange, human combination of reckless improvisation and careful calculation. She had learned one thing already: Kael was utterly unflappable. "You truly do not fear pain," she said, her voice soft, almost incredulous. "Your species tolerates suffering far beyond reason." Kael tilted his head, offering a grin that was more charming than pained. "Fear is optional," he said, flexing his leg just enough to make her wince. "Pain is mandatory. It's the universe's way of keeping us humble, or maybe just entertained." He tested his arm carefully, wincing but resisting the urge to cry out. "Besides, I have a reputation to uphold. If I scream every time I stub a toe, I'll never survive rumor mill day in the colony." Lyra's eyes softened as she watched him. There was something magnetic about this human, something in the way he approached the world with audacious calm. She knelt beside him, her hands steady as she readied an alien splint for the next stage of realignment. Sparks still drifted lazily from the damaged machinery, and the faint hum of a graviton stabilizer created a subtle vibration through the floor, lending the tunnel a surreal, almost theatrical atmosphere. Kael gave her a crooked grin. "You know, I could have screamed. It's a free option for most humans, but you'd miss out on my witty commentary, and that would be a tragedy of galactic proportions." He wiggled his fingers experimentally, then hissed slightly. "Okay, that one hurt, but let's call it a dramatic effect." Lyra couldn't help but stifle a laugh. Her ears flicked nervously, a physical manifestation of her amusement. As she applied the splint, Kael began issuing detailed instructions to himself, muttering a mix of engineering jargon and self-deprecating humor. "Torque it just so, no, don't snap it, okay, maybe just slightly." His voice carried in the metal corridor, bouncing off the walls with a rhythm almost like music. Lyra found herself leaning closer, unable to look away. The way he combined calm, precision, and humor made her heart beat faster than the graviton thrumming under her feet. "Do you always joke while injured?" she asked, curiosity finally overtaking her caution. Kael shrugged, a faint grimace tugging at the corner of his mouth. Always? Nah, but it's more fun than screaming, and besides it keeps my audience awake. Can't have them nodding off while I perform self-surgery, right? He gave a mock bow, the injured arm trembling slightly but holding firm. Lyra's ears twitched sharply, and she shook her head, unable to suppress a soft giggle. Your audacity is perplexing, she admitted, and yet somehow admirable. She applied the final brace, tapping it into place with careful precision, her fingers brushing against his injured skin. Kael noticed and grinned, leaning just enough to mutter, "See, told you humans have their charms." The tunnel shook suddenly, a tremor from the distant machinery. Kael barely flinched, muttering, "Ah, gravity's auditioning for a solo." Very enthusiastic. Lyra's eyes widened as debris rattled nearby, but he steadied himself effortlessly, one hand bracing against the wall, the other casually adjusting the brace. "Relax," he said with a grin. "I promise I won't audition for death today." Minutes later, he tested his arm and leg, moving slowly, deliberately, and with careful humor. "Functional," he declared, wincing slightly but smiling nonetheless. "Not perfect, but it's a masterpiece of improvisation and human stubbornness. Would you like a tour?" His eyebrow arched teasingly. Lyra floated closer, fascinated beyond reason. She had begun to understand that bravery was not always the dramatic charge into danger. Sometimes it was measured, humorous, and utterly human. And as Kael's blue-tinged blood glistened faintly under the flickering lights, she realized that admiration was the smallest part of what she felt. Fascination, respect, and something warmer, something far stranger, had taken root. Kael leaned back against the railing, exhausted yet still grinning. "See," he said softly, almost to himself, "pain is temporary, but humor is forever." Lyra's long ears twitched involuntarily as a laugh escaped her throat, and in that moment, amid sparks, metal, and shadows, the alien girl felt the first threads of a bond weaving itself between them. The corridor hummed with low-frequency vibrations, the kind that made every metal plate underfoot feel alive. Kael shifted carefully, testing his newly aligned arm and leg, flexing his fingers as if measuring their obedience. "Well," he muttered, wincing slightly, "I think we can safely declare me an improvised success story." The tourniquet even earned a standing ovation from the local bacteria. Lyra floated a step closer, her long ears flicking with faint amusement. Blue skin glowing faintly under the fluorescent lights, she observed him with a mixture of incredulity and fascination. Humans, she realized, had a remarkable capacity to laugh at themselves, even while injured. "You are remarkably calm," she said, her voice tight with both admiration and confusion. "Most of your species would have been incapacitated hours ago." Kael grinned, leaning casually against a support beam. "Ah, but you see, that's the secret. Pain is just the universe's way of offering character development. And I am a master of storytelling." He tapped the metal floor lightly with his boot. "Chapter 1, Impalement. Chapter 2, Improvisational Surgery. And Chapter 3, Heroically Failing at Humility." Lyra's ears twitched involuntarily, the corners of her lips lifting despite her best efforts to maintain composure. They moved slowly through the corridor, sparks drifting lazily from a damaged fusion line overhead. Kael's humor acted like a buoy, softening the sharp edges of his injuries while Lyra carried the splints and braces with meticulous care. "You know," Kael said, testing the floor's vibration, "gravity really has a twisted sense of humor. Just when you think it's being polite, it decides to audition for heavy metal percussion." Lyra's violet eyes followed the hum of the graviton stabilizers along the walls. "Do you not feel fear?" she asked, her tone part bewildered, part curious. "Pain is a biological warning system. Survival instinct dictates avoidance." Kael's grin widened, though a faint wince betrayed him. "Fear is optional," he said again, almost philosophically. "And avoidance is overrated. Sometimes you just roll with the punches, crack jokes, and hope the universe is in a good mood. He flexed his fingers experimentally, making a soft snapping sound. See, totally fine. Just a little reminder that bones are obedient if treated with respect and sarcasm. Lyra shook her head lightly, trying to process the strangeness of him. Even as she adjusted the brace along his arm, ensuring it wouldn't slip, she found herself laughing at his commentary. "Your species is illogical," she said softly, almost to herself, "yet somehow admirable." Kael's head tilted and he winked. "Admirable? That's a high honor from someone with ears like satellite dishes. I'll accept it." His tone was playful, but there was a genuine undertone of pride in his composure. Every movement, every careful alignment, every joke in the face of pain. He was demonstrating a quiet kind of courage that words could barely describe. The corridor shuddered suddenly as a distant power relay exploded with a loud pop. Dust rained down and sparks jumped from the walls like tiny fireflies. Lyra's heart skipped, but Kael merely muttered, "Ah, there's the dramatic crescendo. Universe likes to keep things lively." He braced his newly stabilized arm against the railing, motioning for her to stay back. "Don't worry, I'm holding it together. Literally. Mostly." For the first time, Lyra noticed the way his humor and calm seemed to influence the environment. Even the humming machinery and falling debris seemed less threatening in his presence. "You are unsettling," she admitted softly, almost ashamed of her own nervousness. Kael's grin softened into something warmer. "Unsettling," he teased gently. "I prefer charmingly unpredictable, and trust me, you'll get used to it." He adjusted his arm with careful precision, flexed his fingers, and then gave her a mock bow. "Shall we continue the tour? Only mildly dangerous sections ahead, I promise." Lyra's ears twitched in reluctant amusement. Despite the danger, despite the injuries, despite the chaos of a failing mining colony around them, she felt a strange sense of ease. Humor and calm had turned fear into curiosity, and admiration into fascination. And as Kael limped ahead, joking about interstellar etiquette violations and graviton temper tantrums, she realized that the threads of something new, something that might bridge species and experiences, were quietly weaving themselves between them, stronger than she had anticipated. The low hum of the graviton stabilizers had barely faded when the corridor shuddered violently, sending dust and tiny shards of metal cascading from the overhead pipes. Kael's boot slipped on a slick patch of condensation, and he grunted, steadying himself against the wall. "Ah," he said, voice calm but laced with humor, "gravity is auditioning again. I swear it's trying out for a percussion solo, and I'm the unwilling instrument." Lyra's long ears twitched sharply as she instinctively raised her arms, gripping the braces she carried. Sparks danced along the damaged conduit overhead, casting fleeting orange shadows across Kael's blood-streaked uniform. "You must be careful," she warned, hovering close, her blue skin glowing faintly under the flickering lights. "The structure is unstable. You could be injured further." Kael grinned, wincing slightly as he flexed his arm. "Fear optional, humor mandatory, and besides, what's life without a little dramatic effect?" He gingerly tested his leg, then chuckled. "Okay, maybe optional fear too, but only for seasoning." Lyra blinked, fascinated. Humans were reckless, but they carried it with such calm and irreverence that it was almost hypnotic. She adjusted the brace on his arm, and he winked. "Perfect fit. You might be the first alien medtech to get a standing ovation from my bones." A sudden groan echoed through the tunnel, followed by the ominous scrape of shifting metal. Kael braced himself, one hand on a railing, the other gripping a jagged pipe for balance. "Ah, music to my ears," he muttered drily. "Nothing like an impromptu earthquake to keep the adrenaline sharp." Lyra's ears twitched with anxiety, but she stayed by his side, ready to intervene if necessary. Debris rained down from the ceiling as a distant support beam buckled. Kael moved instinctively, guiding Lyra behind a reinforced wall panel. "See, protective maneuvers. I call this one the human being in peril shuffle. Very exclusive choreography." He flexed his leg experimentally and grimaced, but his grin remained, wide and irrepressible. Lyra found herself suppressing a laugh, even as her pulse quickened. Kael's voice cut through the clamor with ironic cheer. "All right, let's see. A few falling rocks, a touch of sparks, and my own carefully misaligned limbs. Couldn't ask for a more elegant adventure." Lyra's violet eyes widened as he moved with careful precision, using his body like a counterweight while nudging smaller debris away. "You're calm," she began, voice almost a whisper. "It is extraordinary." Kael gave a faint shrug, wincing slightly. "Extraordinary is what you make it, or maybe what gravity forces upon you. Either way, I prefer to add my own commentary." He used the railing to pivot, brushing off a jagged shard with his sleeve. "See, just a scratch adds character, and character builds story arcs, right?" As the dust settled, Kael surveyed the tunnel with a mock-dramatic flourish. "Ladies and aliens, we have survived another thrilling installment of Tunnel Collapse, the human edition. No fatalities, only minor bruising and a lifetime of stories." Lyra's ears twitched involuntarily and she laughed, a clear, melodic sound that echoed against the metallic walls. Kael turned to her, one eyebrow raised. "You see, humor and calm, they're a survival strategy. Who knew?" Lyra floated closer, adjusting his arm brace once more. "You are unlike any human I have ever encountered," she admitted softly. "Your courage and your levity, it is remarkable." He tilted his head, grinning through the pain. "Levity is underrated, I find. Makes everything else more tolerable. Also, it confuses aliens. Very effective tactic." Lyra's ears flicked in a mix of exasperation and amusement. She shook her head, realizing that she had never met anyone who could combine humor, resilience, and calm in such a precise, almost magnetic way. As sparks settled and the corridor hummed quietly once more, Kael leaned against the wall, flexing his fingers experimentally. "Adventure over for now," he said, winking. "Time for the next chapter." Humans and aliens walk slowly through shaky tunnels while making bad jokes. Very dramatic title, very accurate synopsis. Lyra's laugh was soft but genuine, and for the first time since she arrived on Zephyria 9, she felt that humans might possess a type of courage and charm completely foreign and utterly captivating. The tunnel had quieted at last. Sparks from the damaged conduits still drifted lazily through the stale air, but the constant vibration of the graviton stabilizers had softened to a low, reassuring hum. Kael leaned against the rail, flexing his newly aligned fingers and wiggling his toes with mock pride. "Ah, victory," he said, grinning. "Nothing like surviving impalement, near collapse, and interstellar hazard regulations all before lunch. Truly, a human achievement to be recorded in the annals of, well, my personal diary anyway." Lyra hovered nearby, adjusting the brace along his arm with careful precision. Her long ears twitched with each of his quips, the blue glow of her skin reflecting in the metallic walls. She had followed him through the chaos, heart racing, yet she now found herself relaxing in his presence. "I still cannot understand how you maintain such composure," she said, voice a mix of wonder and exasperation. "Even now, after all that danger." Kael leaned his head back, smirking. "Composure is like a muscle," he said, flexing dramatically. "You train it with pain, humor, and the occasional sarcastic comment. Want me to give you a crash course?" Lyra's ears flicked in amusement. "I am not certain sarcasm can be taught," she said, though she smiled faintly. He chuckled, then winced slightly as he shifted his weight. "Ah, minor protest from the skeletal system. Nothing to worry about. It's just my bones being dramatic, adding flair to an otherwise mundane day." Lyra floated closer, fascinated, and began to speak softly. "In my culture, courage is demonstrated through ritualized endurance and formal procedure. But you improvise, you joke, you survive. It is remarkable." Kael's grin widened. "Improvisation is half science, half instinct, and a little bit of let's see what happens. And the jokes, those are purely for audience engagement." He wiggled his fingers experimentally, then tapped his arm lightly. C. Still functional. Humor helps with healing too. Science fact. Probably. Lyra tilted her head, studying him. She realized that this human, so different from herself, embodied a type of bravery she had never witnessed before. Not the ceremonial bravery of her people, with their rigid protocols and carefully timed endurance trials, but the quiet, stubborn courage of someone who faced danger with calm and humor, who made the act of surviving itself a kind of art. Perhaps, she said slowly, courage is not always dramatic heroics. Perhaps it can be subtle, observed in calmness, in resilience, in humor even while injured. Kael blinked at her, one eyebrow raised. Subtle courage, huh? Sounds fancy, I like it. Might even put it on my resume. Subtly courageous under debris and gravitational mishaps. Catchy, right? Lyra's ears twitched, the faintest upward curve on her lips betraying amusement. You make light of everything, she said softly, almost disbelieving. And yet you're calm, it is contagious. I feel less afraid simply by being near you. Kael shrugged dramatically, wincing slightly as he shifted his weight. Contagious calm, huh? Very interstellar of me. I should charge for lessons, really. 1 credit per existential crisis avoided. He leaned back against the railing, catching a faint glimmer from a drifting spark. You know, he added, voice softer, humor is a kind of armor, makes the hard stuff easier to digest. Pain, fear, chaos. Sprinkle in jokes and suddenly the universe is just a little more tolerable. Lyra floated closer, fascinated beyond reason. She had expected humans to be fragile, loud, and emotional. She had not expected them to possess such quiet, infectious strength. You are unlike anyone I have ever encountered, she admitted. I do not know whether to study you or admire you. Kael gave her a crooked grin. Why not both? Study me, admire me, take notes, tell stories. That's what makes humans interesting. We survive, we joke, and sometimes we astonish even ourselves. He extended a hand toward her, mock dramatic. Shall we continue our exploration? Maybe the next corridor will offer more adventure, or at least better lighting. Lyra's ears twitched in reluctant amusement. She reached out to take his hand, surprised by the warmth and odd reassurance it brought. The metallic hum of Zephyria 9 tunnels surrounded them, a constant reminder of danger, yet for the first time, Lyra felt a quiet trust. Humor, calm, and resilience had woven a fragile but undeniable bond between them, bridging species, experiences, and worlds in a way neither could have anticipated. The corridor's lights flickered softly, and the hum of the graviton stabilizers had returned to its usual low, steady rhythm. Kael's arm and leg, now fully braced and aligned, ached faintly but were no longer throbbing with the raw intensity of before. He flexed his fingers experimentally, testing the careful splints Lyra had helped him secure. Ah, he said with mock solemnity, the miracle of human engineering and alien assistance. Truly, a collaboration for the ages. Lyra floated beside him, ears twitching with amusement, blue skin glowing faintly in the soft light. You have endured much, she said, voice tinged with wonder. You could have succumbed, yet you persisted with calm and humor. It is extraordinary. Kael shrugged, wincing slightly as he leaned against the wall. Extraordinary is one word for it. Stubborn, reckless, and mildly theatrical might be others, but yes, persistence is key. And a good sense of humor helps, especially when the universe is apparently auditioning for a percussion solo. Lyra's ears twitched involuntarily, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. She had never encountered a human quite like him. Resilient, irreverent, and unflinchingly self-aware in the face of pain and danger. They moved slowly toward the colony's medical bay, the corridor echoing with Kael's occasional commentary. Next stop. Official medbots and intergalactic paperwork, he quipped, limping slightly. I hear they hand out very fancy forms and existential size. Lyra chuckled, the sound blending with the hum of machinery and distant drills. Despite the lingering threat of the colony's failing infrastructure, a sense of calm had settled over them. Kael paused near a fractured section of the corridor, glancing back at Lyra. "You know," he said, voice softening, "I didn't expect to meet anyone like you here. Usually humans get ignored, yelled at, or patched up by robots. But you stayed, you watched, you helped, and somehow that's reassuring." Lyra's ears flicked, almost imperceptibly, and she floated closer. I was shocked at first," she admitted. "Your calm, your humor, your endurance. It challenged my understanding of bravery." Kael grinned, faintly wincing as he adjusted his brace. "Bravery is funny that way," he said. "It's not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, stubborn, and occasionally sarcastic. You never notice it until it's standing right in front of you, smiling through pain." They arrived at the medical bay, a sterile environment humming with energy fields and automated equipment. Kael leaned against a counter, testing his mobility, then gave a satisfied nod. "Functional," he said, voice lightly triumphant. "Not perfect, but certainly operational, and I've learned something important." He gestured to Lyra, blue skin glowing faintly under the sterile lights. "Humor is universal. It helps even when gravity conspires, tunnels collapse, and bones misbehave." Lyra studied him closely, noting the subtle changes. He had endured the physical trauma with remarkable composure, but there was more than that. His resilience, his humor, and his willingness to face danger had forged a quiet strength, tempered by patience and insight. And in turn, Lyra realized she had changed too. Her respect for humans, for their courage, and for their unpredictable way of seeing the universe had deepened into admiration and curiosity. Kael extended a hand, faintly trembling from the effort but steady in purpose. "Shall we call this the end of Chapter 1? He said, grinning despite the aches, "or at least a dramatic intermission before the next adventure." Lyra's ears flicked with amusement as she took his hand. "Chapter 1 is sufficient for now," she said softly, "but I suspect there will be more stories to observe." Kael's grin softened into something quieter, more sincere. "Stories are better with companions," he said, "even unexpected ones." As the two walked slowly into the medical bay, the lights flickering over the metallic walls, the hum of the colony's machinery seemed less threatening, more like a steady heartbeat beneath the chaos. Humor had bridged fear, calm had bridged pain, and the bond between human and alien, unexpected, improbable, and quietly resilient, had solidified, leaving both with a sense of wonder, understanding, and the promise of new chapters yet to be written. Kael limped forward, joking softly about interstellar paperwork, and Lyra's laughter followed him, carrying through the tunnel, a gentle echo of camaraderie and trust. The universe outside remained vast and unpredictable, but within the hum of Zephyria 9 corridors, two very different beings had found equilibrium, strength, and a connection that transcended species, pain, and fear.